Okay, so welcome to this maths webinar. My intention with this webinar today is to share my experience with unit planning, both within my own department and for the Pearson MYP maths series. So it's going to be a little bit more of a narrative and a sharing of practices rather than instructions of how to plan a unit. Because I appreciate the MYP, it's different for different schools. So I'll explain what's worked for us. Hopefully it'll work for you, but I hope that you'll be able to take something away from today. So my agenda, I'll start off with a little bit of information in addition to what Christian's just said, and then I'll give an overview of MYP unit planning. So just a general introduction to how we put together our MYP units, and how we interpret MYP unit planning in terms of mathematics. So I'm focusing completely on mathematics today. Then I'll share my approach to designing one of the MYP units that's associated with the congruency chapter from the MYP 4 and 5 standard textbook. And I'll show how it fits in with the unit plan that we've written. Then hopefully, if there's time, I'll share one of our own ISB units, one of my own school units, that we designed specifically with a view to promoting connections within mathematics. So my first example will be a unit plan around one topic area of mathematics, and then hopefully the second one, I'll have time to go through that in a bit of detail, and that's looking at a unit that's bringing together different areas of mathematics. And I'll also explain how I've adapted a unit plan that we already have in place to take advantage of the Pearson resources. Okay, so first of all, a little bit of information. Please remember to mute. And as has already been said, please ask your questions in the Q&A. There'll be a little place partway through where I'll stop and I'll take some questions. And then hopefully I'll have a chance for some questions at the end as well. The resources that I'll be sharing today, so everything that you see on the PowerPoint and a little bit more, I've made a Padlet for us and I've popped them all up there. So it might be an idea if you open up that Padlet now, because some of my slides, they might be a little bit small and a little bit difficult to see. So if you open up the Padlet, or if you use the QR code, hopefully, you will see this pop up. So you can see on this Padlet here, in this section, I've got the links that I'll be sharing in the webinar today. There's a unit plan there, there's the PDF version of this presentation. So if you're like me and your eyesight isn't quite what it was, then perhaps download that PDF and then you can see the slides a little bit more clearly, because you can see I'm going to be sharing things like the unit plan and the text is quite small on the screen. I'll be sharing some additional resources here, and depending on the feedback and the questions that I have today, in this bit here at the end of the webinar, I'll be able to add some more resources on there, and you'll be able to access them at the end of the webinar as well. And then here, if you have your questions and you want to pop it in the Q&A, fantastic. If you don't want to put it in the Q&A, or if you remember a question at the end of the webinar, then I've put a little place here where you can deposit a question. And again, as I said at the beginning, this is my experience. It's a bit of a narrative. So if you've got anything that you'd like to say about your experience with unit planning and you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it. So there's a section here that's got unit planning suggestions there. Okay, so it might be handy if you have that open as I'm going through the webinar. Okay, so a little bit about introductions. So this is me. My name is Paula Rowlands, and I've been the head of the maths department at International School of Basel since 2014. Before that, I was the head of maths department at an international school in the UK. We were a DP school, I have taught diploma, IB diploma, I've taught A-level further maths, GCSE, IGCSE, MYP, so I'm used to lots of different systems. But since 2014, I've been focused just on the MYP and the DP. So we are a full IB school. We have PYP through to MYP and through to DP. So we are very much an IB school. So my experience is very much within unit planning in a whole IB school. I'm also a member of the author team for the Pearson MYP Maths series, which is why I find myself here today. So that's a little bit about me. So in 2014, two things happened. I took up the position of HOD at the International School of Basel. And at the same time, the MYP introduced the new chapter. And I was sent off on a Category 1 MYP training session. And my lasting impression, my first impression, when I attended this workshop was words. For a mathematician, I was surrounded by words, lots of words, unfamiliar terminology that I hadn't really experienced in the DP. And I was left wondering, how does it all fit together? How on earth am I going to write this curriculum? I felt I was well trained in delivery and pedagogy, but not trained in curriculum design. And it was quite daunting. I felt quite overwhelmed by it. And I was left with the following questions. So first of all, what's the difference between the IB concepts, the key concepts, related concepts, and what I was used to as mathematical concepts? Are they the same? Are they different? Are they connected? How on earth do you connect the mathematics with the global context? How do you do that? What's expected? How do you incorporate ATL skills into the unit? Do you have to do all of them, or do you focus on one or two of them? Does my unit summative assessment reflect the unit, or do I design the unit leading to the summative assessment, or is it a two-way street? Are they interconnected? And how do you write an inquiry question? What is an inquiry question? And when you're planning the unit, do you start with the mathematics? Do you start with the concepts? Or do you start with the global context? And I was wondering, well, these were my questions. So I suppose the overarching question that I came away with was, where do I start? And I found that the MYP unit planning training that I had was really focused on concepts, choosing key concepts and related concepts and doing that first. But I always found that in mathematics, it's so important that we have our content dovetailed and smoothly connected, and it has to be scaffolded. And so our mathematical concepts, I felt, were just as important as the key concepts and the related concepts. And if you read the MYP guide for mathematics, it actually says this, it states this in the guide. So our MYP curriculum guide says in mathematics, learning is generally sequential. And most importantly here, success in later maths courses relies on building fundamentals in earlier ones. And this is the important thing, this is what I picked up on as well. So not only in your teaching methods, but also in your assessments, your problem solving strategies, and they all need to be sequenced appropriately. So in the MYP, your unit planning is all interconnected. So you've got your written curriculum, that's your framework, that's your vertical articulation from year to year. What are you going to be following from year to year? And then you've got your taught curriculum. So that's what's going on in the classroom. What are the learning experiences for the students? And then you've got your assessed curriculum. You know, how are you going to determine what you've taught in the classroom, what the students have experienced, how has that gone? Has that been successful? And all of these are all interconnected, and you have to have them all in mind when you're doing your unit planning. So it's not easy for our subject to begin a unit from a key concept point of view, because we've got to ensure that all our mathematical concepts are also interconnected. So I won't talk too much more about the interconnectedness in this webinar, because I'm going to be talking about that tomorrow in the MYP to DP transition. But it's worth mentioning here because it's guided our approach to unit planning. So our approach to unit planning, it can be best described as layering. So we have a layering approach. We don't do it sequentially, we kind of layer it. And we'll actually revisit another layer once we've created the next one, and we'll review again partway through. And we'll also review at the end. So our first point of our planning, when we're doing our units, sitting down and thinking of a unit, our first point is always the concepts, the mathematical concepts, the related concepts, and the key concept. And after that, we think, well, what procedural fluency do we want to promote with the students? Do we want to look at applying their skills, or are we focusing on problem solving? What mathematical connections do we want to make with this unit? And what mathematical processes are we going to focus on? And once we've thought of all that, the next thing we consider is, how are we going to assess it? What is the summative assessment going to be? And then we think, well, if we're guiding the students towards this summative assessment, then what's the learning experience going to be in the classroom? How are we going to be teaching it? And what formative assessments are we going to use? And what ATL skills are we focusing on for them to be able to access the summative? And once we've thought of all that, before we design our lesson tasks, we then decide on our global context. And then once we've decided on that, we bring it all together in our statement of inquiry. So you can see, well, hopefully in my diagram, you can see what I mean about this layering approach. So we'll start, the heart of our unit is our mathematical concepts and our big picture concepts, the key concept and the related concept. And around that, we then think, well, what skills do we want them to have? And then our mathematical processes, do we want to focus on reasoning, problem solving, communication? And then we'll look at the tasks that we're going to use in the classroom. And we'll think of the type of task we want to use. But only when we've decided on the global context do we then focus our classroom tasks and our learning experiences within the global context. So we're kind of swapping between the layers as we're building it all together. So now I'll go into a little bit more detail about how we decide on those details. So how do we decide on the key concept of the unit? How do we decide on the learning experiences for the students? So I'll start with the concepts, because this is the heart of our unit. So we look at our mathematical concepts, and we look at those mathematical concepts. What key concept and related concept do they lend themselves to? So our key concept is our big idea. What big idea do we want flowing through this unit? And then our related concepts, those are the little details, those are the concepts that we are able to focus on. So we decide on those all at the same time with the mathematics concepts that we're going to be using in the unit. So when we're deciding our key concept, we have 3 to choose from. We can choose from form, from logic, and from relationships. So when we've decided on our mathematical concepts, then we'll decide on which of these 3 key concepts best suits the unit. What are we going to focus on? And then these are our related concepts. These are the details of our unit. And it's worth pointing out that we're not restricted to these. These are the related concepts that are suggested for mathematics, but you can use related concepts from outside of the maths field. And the unit that I did on congruency, you'll see how that works and how I chose a related concept that was outside of mathematics. So looking at our key concept, I'll give an example now. So if we're looking at functions, for example, so functions, we are looking, the mathematical concept there is relationships between variables. And we know that they can be represented in algebraic form, graph form, you can do mapping diagrams. So for us, one of our units, we use the big picture as form. We are looking at representing the relationship between variables in different forms, in graph form, in algebraic form. So that would be our big picture. And then our related concepts, the details, well, I'm looking at representation there. I'm representing a relationship in different ways. And we would also possibly choose models because we're looking at functions because we're wanting to make models. So that gives you a little idea of how those concepts can connect all together. But so you've got the heart, you've got the mathematical concepts, you've got the key concepts, and you've got the related concepts. Then we look at our summative assessment. That's the next step in our unit planning. So when we're approaching the summative, we think, well, what does the inquiry of the unit lend itself to? So it'll always be linked for us to the nature of the. Do we need to develop pattern finding skills for the students to access the summative? Well, that would be criterion B. Does it require the students to be able to apply their understanding in a real life context? Well, that would be criterion D. And then we'll focus our planning and we'll revisit and develop the inquiry tasks in line with the chosen summative assessment. So our summative assessment, that's dependent on the nature of the inquiry. So whether we'll pick a criterion B or a criterion D. Did I explain that?
Well, you have now at the very least.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so once we've decided on our summative assessment, we'll look in more detail at our inquiry questions and we'll design those leading up to our summative. So if our summative is a criterion B, then our inquiry task, our practice task, will be focusing on pattern finding. So you can see now how we're going through the layers of our unit planning. And then at this point, we'll consider the global context and we will frame these classroom tasks within the global context and our assessment task will be through that lens of the global context. So the details of the tasks that we'll use, they're going to be dependent on the mathematics concepts that we're looking at. And our inquiry questions, again, these will be dependent on the nature of the unit that we're doing. Our inquiry questions could be debatable, they could be conceptual, or they could be factual. And again, we'll decide those depending on what else we've decided for the unit. The inquiry questions, we also use those in our day-to-day lesson plans, and it helps to guide our inquiry within the classroom. And then the final step of our unit planning, once we've decided on all this, we'll summarise the unit with a short and precise statement that links the summative assessment, the global context, the key and related concepts all together in a clear and purposeful statement that can be used when introducing the unit. We also go back to it partway through the unit, and we also look at it at the end of the unit. So that's the end of our unit planning. So the lessons that we've learnt when we've been doing our unit planning, first and foremost, the MYP unit it's an interconnected web of different planning levels. We've also realised that units are not static. So with the best will in the world, you can plan this unit and then it doesn't always go to plan. We found that's our experience. So we have to be quite adaptable and flexible when we're planning our units. For us, the concepts are central absolutely central. So for example, the big idea of form, when we're looking at functions, we find that that's central to our unit. We also incorporate time for inquiry. We find that that's really important. Again, I won't go into details about why that's important, because Ibrahim's going to do that in his webinar at the end of April. And what we've also found is incorporating problem solving into the unit. It's when you have the pressure of trying to get through content, it's very difficult to take a bit of time to focus on problem solving. And sometimes in the past we've used problem solving sometimes as a bit of a differentiation task. But what we found is we incorporate actually teaching problem solving strategies into our unit. And it's made a huge difference for the approach that students take towards their mathematics. We find sharing the rubrics help. So the students, if they're sitting a summative assessment, well, if they don't know what we're expecting from them, it's going to be a bit difficult for them. So we always share the rubrics with the students. We also find it very important to use the language and model the process. So when we're in the classroom, we're using the terminology of the concepts and we're modelling the language. And what we've also noticed is MYP units need to be crafted. They're not so much written, they are crafted. And they're crafted carefully and collaboratively. And we found that our very best units are the ones that have developed over time. So we've delivered these units 1 year, we've collaboratively got together and chatted about it, tweaked it, changed it. And those ones that we've developed over time, those are the ones that are our best units. Okay, so I'll take a short break now to answer any questions on general unit planning, and then I will go through it all again. I'll do a unit planning chat again, but I'll look at within a particular topic area. And then I'll do the second example, that's where we've adapted one of our units. So I'll take a few moments to take any questions.
Paula, we have a question from Guan. Here we go. How do you approach the key and related concepts? Is it an inductive or deductive? And how do your students feel about the concept-driven learning?
Oh, okay. So again, we decide on our key concept and our related concept depending on the maths concepts that we're doing. So I gave the example of functions. So the mathematical conceptual understanding then is relationships between variables. It's moving between different forms of representing those mathematical concepts of a relationship. So that kind of guides, the maths concepts guide which related concepts and key concepts we use. So we don't tend to look at the key concept, or how do we want to teach about the key concept through the mathematics. We do it as a two-way system. So we look at the maths concepts, the conceptual understanding of the maths, and then we see, well, which of the related and key concepts best suits that, which related and key concepts can we teach through those maths concepts. So we tend to do it like that. Our students in the conceptual classroom, it's slightly slower progress at the beginning, we find. Students that come to us from other schools that are not conceptual curriculum based, they've got lots of facts, lots of procedural skills, but we find that there's a thin layer of understanding. They know what to do, but they don't always know why they're doing it. So our students are very aware that they are learning much deeper and why does this work, rather than a how. And we'll also take the time to develop their processes, so their reasoning, their communication. We focus a lot on that. New students to our conceptual classroom do take a little bit of time, but what we find is that they have those mathematical process skills. And then as they get a little bit older and those have developed, then they can access new content an awful lot more quickly than students that haven't come through the conceptual approach. I hope that answers your question. And again, I'm talking from an experience point of view here, what we find in our school.
Okay, thanks, Paula. We have another question. What are some tips for teaching problem solving within units?
Oh, yeah, this is a big one, isn't it? And I think Ibrahim's going to go into more detail about this in his webinar at the end of April. There's a university professor in the UK, Colin Foster, who's done a lot of work on this. And he's got some fantastic resources that he shares. So I'd recommend you read some of his work. And that's what I've incorporated into my classroom. And it seems so obvious now, but the biggest aha moment I had with problem solving was to teach the problem solving, teach the strategies that you can use for problem solving, but within mathematics that's well embedded in the student. So for example, with my grade 9 class at the moment, we've recapped perimeter, area, volume. So those are embedded skills in the students. So what we've done in the unit this year, we've revised those basic mathematical concepts, and now they're all embedded in the students. So they're not struggling with the maths, and now we're giving them problems. So we're that's my first strategy for teaching problem solving. Teach strategies for problem solving within maths that's already embedded. I think if you're trying to teach problem solving within teaching new maths, that's when it becomes a bit of a problem. We will give them examples, we'll give them problems that start off quite relatively easy. So it's a problem where one strategy will help. So for example, oh, draw a diagram, this will help. Then we'll make the problems a little bit more complex. So yes, you've got the strategy of drawing a diagram, but then, oh, hang on, look carefully at the wording. What is the wording telling you? Then we'll make the problem a little more complex. So they might need different areas of maths. So then we'll start introducing the idea of a toolkit. So they've got draw a diagram, they've got comprehend the question, and then we'll introduce something like, well, what do I know? Well, I know this about this area of math, this about this area of math. So we tend to scaffold the problem solving within familiar mathematics. Okay, I hope that helps.
Thanks, Paula. And we have another question. Is there a minimum of lessons or hours that a planner must have?
No, there isn't. So this is the beauty of the MYP. You can design your unit how you want it to be. What we find is for our grade 9 and our grade 10, we will have possibly 4 or 5 units. So we won't have lots of little units. We'll have larger units, and they can be for about 8 weeks at a time, but there's no set time. It's entirely up to you and what suits you as a school. We even have one very small unit. So sometimes if we're looking at the end of the year and summative assessments at the end of the year, we'll actually have a unit on revising mathematics, and that might just be a week. So it's entirely up to you. But I think to really get into the depths of conceptual understanding, you do need a larger time for your units. It's all about the depth, really. But again, this is why I love the MYP. It's so flexible. You do what suits your school.
Thank you. And we have a follow-up question to the one about the concept-driven learning. At what stage do you introduce the concepts to the students, and do you often refer back to them throughout the unit?
Yes, yes. We introduce them right at the start. So if we're starting a new unit, we will we'll do a little bit of a recap of the concepts that they had in the previous units, because we're at the stage now where our units are all kind of interconnected, they're not separate. So we'll start with a review of what they did before, and then we'll tell them what our key concept is. So in this unit, we're looking at relationships, and then we'll give them a little bit of a description about why we're looking at relationships and how the big concept of relationships, how it applies to the unit that we're going to do. And we'll share the inquiry question with them, and so that they're aware of it then. So to answer your question, we share it right at the start, and we explicitly share it. We implicitly teach it, but we explicitly share it at the start. Okay, I hope that answers your question. Please ask another one if I haven't been clear enough.
Thanks, Paula. I think we can move on now.
All right.
Thanks.
So the next part, I'm going to go through all of that unit planning again, but I'm going to go through it with an example so you can see how it all fits in with the maths. So in this section, I'll demonstrate how I developed one of the chapters as a possible example of a unit plan. But I do appreciate that most unit plans will cover sections in different topic areas, and they'll all be specific for particular school environments. But this approach just demonstrates how all the parts come together to make a unit. So when I was considering the content for the congruency chapter, I did a little bit of brainstorming, and then I decided that I wanted to use the big idea that artists and cultures express themselves through geometric artwork that contains lots of patterns. So already in my mind, I'm starting to think of the global context, I'm starting to think patterns. And then that led me towards the global context of personal and cultural expression. And the key concept of form I used, because I'm looking at artwork, I'm looking at mathematical patterns within an artistic form. So form was leading itself to be my key concept. And then my related concepts, obviously I was going to go for pattern. And then in this example, you see I went for creativity. And this goes back to what I was saying before about related concepts. They don't have to be from the maths choice. They can be from a different subject area. So this one here, I felt that form was my key concept. That was my big idea, my big picture. You can represent maths in different forms. And then my little details that I was focusing on were the related concepts of pattern and creativity. So I'll demonstrate now with my unit plan diagram again how this all came together. So at the heart of my unit plan, what I was hoping to get across in the unit was congruency, mathematical proof through form, pattern and creativity. And these were the mathematical ideas I wanted to get across. And I was looking at geometric problem solving. So I was focusing the unit on problem solving. These were the connections, different areas of maths I thought that the unit would lend itself to. And those were the processes. And my summative assessment, you might already be thinking she's going to do a criterion B, okay, because she's looking at patterns. So criterion B lent itself to this unit. And then once I decided on all that, I thought about the lesson experiences that I wanted the students to have, and I wrote those with in mind. I was heading towards a criterion B. So the focus of the unit was pattern finding. And then the lesson experiences were written with that in mind. And then I thought my global context, it's all about expression, personal cultural expression. So those lesson experiences were written in the global context that was personal and cultural expression. And I brought that all together. And so my statement of inquiry, you can see I've got my global context in there. I've got my key concept and I have got my related concept. So personal and cultural beliefs, that's my global context, expressed through geometric form. There's my key concept. In a creative way, there's my related concept. Okay, so that was the big picture for my lesson planning, for my unit planning. So let's have a look at the details. So form, Again, I chose form because that was the big picture for this unit, because it encompasses the underlying structure and external appearance of shape. The use of creative art as a lens allows students to consider the underlying structure of creative artwork through mathematical properties. So this leads to the choice of creativity and pattern. Okay, so that's how I chose my concepts for that unit. And then once the ideas are formed, then I start documenting the planning. So I'll just show now how my ideas for the unit can be documented in a unit plan. And I love the unit plan because it makes sure that it all knits together well. It helps you to catch any little gaps that you might have in your unit. So on the screen here, there's an example of the Pearson unit plan that goes with the congruency chapter. So you can see that there's a description of what the unit hopes to achieve, what I hope the students will understand, what they will do, and again, giving an overview of the whole unit and how it relates to that global context. In our ISB unit plans, we also have a title that we share with the students, and it's something that encompasses the unit. So we'll never use branch titles. Again, going back to this modelling the process and modelling the language, we'll never call our unit algebra or geometry. We always give it something that relates to the concepts. I've shared this unit, the full unit, I've shared it on the Padlet. So if you can't see it here, you should be able to download it. Keep it, it's free, it's a goodie for you. But I'll keep the Padlet unlocked and I'll keep it open so you can access it at a later time. It's probably worth mentioning here that the IB have also published a series of webinars on what they call their partially completed unit planners. And they've done this as a support for teachers to get started on unit plans. And I think that's a recognition just how hard this can be for teachers. I put a link to it on the Padlet. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, they're not for maths. I think it's for art and design, but they're quite informative if you wanted to have a look at those. Okay, so the detail of my summative assessment, you've probably already put in the pieces together for yourself. I'm looking at patterns. So the focus of my unit here is pattern finding. My summative assessment is going to lead itself towards a criterion B. I'm also focusing on communication because I'm looking at proof. There's an element of geometric proof in there. So I'm focusing the maths processes on students' abilities to communicate mathematics. So my summative assessment, it's a criterion BC. That's how I decided on that. And once I've decided all that, I then go back and I write my lesson experiences with all of that in mind and within the context of the global concept. So here I've detailed the summative assessment, and you can see in this unit plan, I've written here how the summative assessment relates to the summative assessment objectives. So we find that's really quite important when we're planning our lessons. We'll look at that summative assessment and really make sure it's meeting these criteria. And then in this section here, you can see I've described how that summative assessment is related to my summative inquiry. So I'm just making sure it's all still interconnected there. And these unit plans are available for all the chapters in the Pearson textbook. I'll come to that a little bit later. So once the assessment's been decided upon, I then sort out my learning processes. So then I write those learning experiences with all of that in mind. So I think it's probably best if I just go on to some examples. Okay, so I'll go on to here. So here you can see an example of an explore task and an investigation task. So you can see the explore task, it's definitely written within that global context. So the students are learning about personal and cultural expression. So we're looking at artwork. You can see it's also connected to the big picture, which is form. And it's an open-ended explore task because there's no right or wrong answer. The students don't actually know what I'm hoping to teach them at this point. They're just exploring. So they're exploring the global context, and they're also exploring patterns in visual form. And then you can see there's an investigation, again, linking the global context, the key and related concepts. And here's another example. And you can see in this example, again, it's connecting to the global context, the key and related concepts, and the mathematical concepts. And in this example of a learning experience task for the classroom, it provides some preparation for the summative assessment that I've got in mind. And some of you may notice I'm also sowing some seeds here for TOK in this unit. So I hope that demonstrates how you can incorporate the concepts, the global context, into tasks that you're going to use in the classroom. And it's all interconnecting. And then here are some practice tasks. So the practice tasks, I designed them to make sure the students have the opportunity to practice, to develop that procedural fluency. Understanding is great, but we also need to make sure they've got procedural fluency. And again, the questions in the practice tasks, they're all written with the concepts in mind, with the global context in mind. And it's at this point, I answered a question before and I said that I explicitly share concepts and global context, and then implicitly. So here I'm doing it implicitly through the tasks in the classroom. Okay, so the teacher resource pack that comes with the series, you can get that as well. The learning experiences have been documented in great detail. So here you can see for congruent triangles and quadrilaterals in the congruency chapter, I've listed in great detail how the lesson experiences will help the progress of students through the unit. I must be honest, my own units don't normally have this much detail. As a team, we'll discuss the tasks that we're going to do, and then we'll just summarise them in the plan. But I felt it was very useful to have these for teachers if they're going to be using the unit plans, because it just gives an idea of what the tasks are there for. Okay, so with this unit, the final step is linking this all together with a statement of inquiry. So my summative is pattern finding in a cultural context. So that's linking to my personal and cultural expression. My big picture is form, and my related concepts there are pattern and creativity. So I don't know if you want to have a go at thinking about a statement of inquiry, but hopefully, here's mine. Now you can see I colour coded it. When I'm writing my statements of inquiry, I find this really helps. So you can see in the yellow, my statement of inquiry is relating to my global context. You can see in the pink, I'm relating it to my key concept. And you can see in the purple, I'm relating it to my related concepts. So it brings together all of these bits for the unit, and hopefully it summarises the unit in a way that can be understood. You get an idea of what the unit's going to be about. But I find that colour coding really helps me when I'm doing my units. Okay, so to finish this webinar, I mentioned at the beginning that MYP units can be across different topic areas. So I'm just going to finish off with one of our own ISB units that we established over time, and I'll just explain a little bit about the unit, and I'll show you how I took bits from different parts of the Pearson textbook. I took different learning experiences and I meshed them together so it met our particular needs of our particular unit. So the unit was called Shape Up, Measuring and Manipulating Shapes. And we chose the global context, the key concept and the related concepts, as you can see here on the slide. So our summative task here is a CD, and it allows students to demonstrate how they can use their understanding of surface area and volumes to minimise material used in packaging. So you can see it's an application to real life. And it also connects with the concepts that we did in the previous unit. We did a previous unit on quadratics. And again, here you can see colour coding pieces come together to make my statement of inquiry. So mathematical relationships, there's my key concept there, relationships. Empower us to measure the seemingly immeasurable in space and time. We were leading towards trigonometry. You know, how can trigonometry be used to measure things that, well, we can't measure with a ruler? So you're going to have to use your trigonometry. So that was the big idea for this unit. In the next few slides, I'll show how we have incorporated different learning experiences. But again, I realised I might not have time to do this in detail. So I have popped this unit plan on the Padlet for you. And so it's there in detail for you to look at if you wanted to have a look. Okay, so here is our unit plan. I've given an example of the summary task that we used. More details of the planning. It's all there on the Padlet. Okay, so in summary, I hope this webinar has given you an insight into our approach to unit planning. Just a little reminder that the resources I've used today are on the Padlet. If you would like to leave any feedback for me, please do. I've put another Google form on there. If you just like to write some comments, I'm more than happy to receive feedback. And now I'll just take some more questions if there are any.
Not any questions having come through at the moment, Paula, but if anyone does have any questions in the last few minutes of the webinar, please feel free to write them into the Q&A box. Generally, this always happens, Paula, where I say there's no more questions and then one comes through. Inevitably, like now, for example. Question here, just to clarify, by mathematical concepts, do you mean the subject content?
I mean the concepts, the mathematical concepts behind the content. So I suppose content would be, if I can go back to the example I used before, content would be functions. But the mathematical concept behind that is the relationship between variables. And how. So the concept of a function, how it takes a domain set and it maps it onto a range set. So that's content, but it's also a mathematical concept. And then I suppose you could have content which is inverse functions, but the mathematical concept there is an inverse function takes the range set and maps it back onto the domain set. So in my mind, there's a very subtle difference, but they're still totally connected.
Great, thank you. Another question here. What would you say to a teacher who thinks the MYP doesn't let us get through as much content as we need to get through?
Yeah, that unfortunately is something that we found as a maths department as well. When I look at the content of an IGCSE programme, there's no doubt there's more in there. They get through more content. But I don't think, when I was teaching the IGCSE, I don't think I went into as much depth. I think it's much more how to do the maths rather than a deep understanding of why what you're doing works. I think for me, I having done I've done IGCSEs, I've done A-levels, I think I prefer the MYP approach, because I've noticed that that deep understanding allows them to make connections better. It also allows them to become problem solvers a little bit easier. And it also makes it easier for them to access new content. So it's almost as if you're doing a content-based course, the speed and the depth at which they access the content doesn't seem to change. But when you do the conceptual way, I find that the speed and understanding and the depth of understanding, it kind of follows that path, not that path. But I do take your point. There are advantages and disadvantages for both types, but I would never not teach the mathematics conceptually. I would always teach it conceptually. Again, because I want to go for that understanding and that ability to problem solve. I don't think you can do that if you've just got procedures.
Great, thank you. There's lots of questions coming through now. What is the role of questions, for example, conceptual, debatable, in unit planning?
Oh, okay. I find that the best use of them is to guide the lesson itself. I know they're there to guide the unit planning. I think the way we think of it, we write our inquiry questions as, what do we want the students to be curious about? So if I perhaps skip back, oops, hopefully I can skip back here. Oops, no, so here we go. There. So if you look at these questions here, so it's what are they curious about? It's that big picture to the unit. So, for example, in a lesson that I've done with my grade 9s, I won't say today we are going to do Sokotoa. I will say, how on earth can we measure the height of a building? You know, how can I measure the height of the building? How can I do that? So it's more of an inquiry question. How can I do it? And that frames my lesson rather than this is what I am going to teach you. This is what we're going to explore. So that's how we use our inquiry questions. I hope I answered the question there.
Great, thank you, Paula. I think we're probably out of time for questions now, although there are a few left. But if anyone has any questions that have not been answered, we have the board there that Paula's provided. And I'll post another link in the chat now for it as well. So you can put any other questions on the Padlet. So with that, I'd like to thank Paula for her time today. I'm sure, well, in fact, from the chat here, got a lot of people commenting about how amazingly useful it was. So thank you very much, Paula, for your time today. No worries. Everyone will hopefully return tomorrow at the same time in the morning or in the afternoon, wherever you are, to join us again for the second in our series of MYP webinars. And sorry, Paul, I've forgotten. What's this next one on?
It's on the transition between MYP and DP.
There you go. I really should remember that.
Yeah, some of the questions I've had today about, oh, you know, do you get through enough content? That's actually a worry for us when we're going from MYP to DP. So I'll be chatting about that tomorrow. Excellent.
So we'll be sending an email to everyone here later on today with the recording and also various links, including a registration link to the webinar tomorrow if you've not already seen that. So we'll hope to see you again tomorrow. But until then, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening.